Once in the mid-70s, I don't remember exactly now, Olesa Adamovich called me. We were acquaintances, we were friends, and he suggested we write a book together about the siege of Leningrad. And after that, he came here. And here at my place, we had a very difficult conversation about this, since I flatly refused his offer. I said firstly that I had never written a book with anybody before, and I didn't even know how it was done. And secondly, I had not come to peace with my own war yet. And after all, what on earth had he to do with the siege? Well, nothing at all. He was then very inspired by the success of his book, which 3 of them had written, called Out of the Fire. The book is based on the personal memoirs of the countrymen of Belarus, who miraculously escaped their captors during the German occupation. He wanted to do the same kind of thing about Leningrad, write down the stories of the survivors of the siege. Well, I refused. For me, the siege was sort of a very well-known story, written and rewritten many times. It had been in the films, in the theater. There had been stories and novels and documentaries about it. Why should we come back to the siege again? Why in the world would we want to?
Several reasons account for the fact that we lost so much in this war. But at a certain point of time after the war, we were stated the figure of 7 million, which was certainly absolutely inadequate to what had happened, because only Leningrad alone lost over 1 million. And afterwards, we gave the figure of 20 million. But we know that nowadays, historians absolutely, definitively say that we lost over 35 million during that war.
At last, he persuaded me to go and listen to one story. We went to one woman, a survivor we knew of that during the siege was 18 years old. She used to go to her beloved, her fiancé Fedya, to the front line, 16 kilometers there and 16 kilometers back. Noticing that I had somehow lost my head, Olesa then took me to another siege survivor that he was acquainted with. And I must say, he eventually got things his way. Yes, I agreed to write with him. From the very beginning, it was clear that we had to use a tape recorder. We would come to a flat. They, as a rule, lived in communal flats, and they didn't want to speak. It was too hard. If she sometimes would try and tell her story to anybody, to her children, for instance, or her neighbors, grandchildren, no one would listen to her. Everybody was tired of listening to it. Everybody was tired of this war. That is it. It is gone, forgotten, forgotten. How much longer? How much longer? But here come 2 writers with their recorders and sit and listen with so much attention and so much interest. Other people could not help themselves. They would also come, sit next to her and listen. This was a discovery not of the siege in the general sense, but the discovery of the flat, the house, the street siege. And so we would record day after day. The survivors of the siege passed us on to each other. On the whole, we did not tell anything about our work to the reporters, but the internal rumors, as always happens in the city, the talk about people recording stories of siege victims and looking for them. This gossip started circulating, and we got passed from one to another, and all this gathered like a snowball. And we, you understand, did not have the time to visit everybody. So Alès and I split up. He would visit some people, I would visit the others. Shorthand typists were working. What was clear from the very beginning, the stories do not repeat. We recorded about 100 of them. 100 stories and thought surely there would be repetition. No. Everyone had his or her own story, own history, own tragedy, some kind of its own singularity.
Once, Volodya Dobromolov said, "Everything you tell in your siege book, this is all lies. There was no starvation in Leningrad. There were no thousands of deaths." He said, "I studied all statements from the front line. There was not a word about Leningrad starving to death. There was nothing of the kind."
It was interesting to work together, but at the same time we quarreled and we argued. I sent him my version, he would return it to me crossed out with some offensive comments at the margins. I did the same. We quarreled, we made peace, we came back. I don't know how Ilf and Petrov, for instance, or the Goncourt brothers wrote, and others, but with us it was all, you understand, very full of argument. What is the siege? What is it? We began to feel and to find some absolutely special inner significance for which we had to do this work. This significance was utterly different from the stereotype of the siege generally accepted at that time, which had already established itself and turned into stone in its ideological immunity. Whereas for us, the deep meaning of the siege was unfolding as the story of human suffering with the course of time. You know, there are misfortunes at the front line. It means you have been wounded. They cut your hand, leg, a man dies. This is grief. During the siege, everything was different. Absolutely different things happened. During the siege, your own family was dying. They were dying slowly. They were dying for weeks and months, and you could do nothing to help them. The siege is not like at the front line. At the front, you have committed a feat. Yes, you were a sniper. You managed to hit. You were brave on the battlefield, you see. We captured a reinforced emplacement. We captured a high point. This is an act of bravery. This is heroism. People are awarded with orders and medals for this. It is stated in the orders. And even if this is not awarded, still everybody around knows how well you behaved. And what is the siege? The siege is when you walk along the street and see a man cannot rise from the step or is lying already, but he is still alive, lying there. And now somebody with the last effort lifts him up and leads him to his place. What can one give? a cup of boiling water. One gave him this cup of boiling water. The man sat for some time in the warm, came alive again, and left. You have rescued a human being. Nobody is going to give you a medal for this. You are not going to get an order. No one will know about this apart from you and this man. You see, this is a quite different system of life, the system of heroism. This is not heroism, this is mercifulness. This is self-sacrifice. This is kindness. This is quite another set of human qualities. This was an absolutely new subject matter for us and for the literature, utterly different. And this meant that the party-rooted, ideological, you see, stereotype of the siege as a heroic epic and a feat and so on was somewhere in the distance, away from us, as our interest focused on an absolutely different aspect.
Out of interrogation, inquiries, diaries, clarification of all circumstances of the 900-day siege, we discovered that the unbelievable, striking endurance of Leningrad and the residents of the city, it fed also upon this quality of the city and the citizens. This is what I call intelligence.
And finally came the day when we put a full stop and we finished our book. Our internet scandals stopped and external ones started. This means that certainly we were past the most difficult part, but we did not imagine what was waiting for us. We came to the Leningrad-based magazines, first the Vezda. They refused us. Then the Neva. They returned our manuscript back. They did not just return it. They said all kinds of unpleasant things about our destroying the image of the heroic Leningrad, which had been created by our propaganda, that we were not patriots. The manuscript was sent to the regional party committee from the Sovietsky Pisatel publishing house. First, a printing prohibition arrived from the regional committee, and the corresponding words on what harmful things we were doing. And the harm was also because at the time, I think, the siege was beginning to be filmed based on the novel by Tchaikovsky. And this film, all of this rendition, was perceived as a model. This is what the siege must look like for the people. This is how we present it. Regulated in all aspects, from all sides. This is the direction of our party propaganda. This is a heroic epic. This is selfless work during the siege. This is, you understand, in spite of everything, under the guidance of the party and the government. There were also some particularities. The particularities meant that we, for example, considered that according to the studies of Leningrad-based historians, 1 million people died during the siege. And the official propaganda adopted the figure of 660,000. Why did this figure emerge? Because it had been declared at the Nuremberg trials. And the Nuremberg trials in this case were basically something like the ultimate authority. And no new data could change anything here. It was clear that we would not be able to publish the book in Leningrad, if such was the decision of the regional committee, and besides, represented by the first secretary of the regional committee of that time. That was that. All opportunities of Leningrad were exhausted, and we went to Moscow. In Moscow, we approached the Novy Mir magazine. The editor-in-chief at that time was Sergei Narapchatov, who had been at the war. And in particular, he was at the Leningrad front and had enough of it. And the editor of the prose department was a marvelous editor, Diana Tveklian, who would generally handle censorship with extraordinary skill and wit. Still, the censors, having studied the novel, they fiddled a lot with it. They gave me more than 60 remarks. That is, these were not remarks in the proper sense. Censors do not have remarks. Censors have requirements. 65 deletions or alterations. Well, some were absurd, but they went something like this. No suggestions of cannibalism. You cannot make mention of any types of forgery, of cards and so on. No mention of any incidents of pillaging. Sometime in 1942, in February or March, when the bathhouses were opened for the first time, it seems there were 2 or 3 bathhouses in Leningrad. And as there was little fuel, they only heated one compartment, one for both men and women to wash. Well, there were many stories, very humorous stories about the way things were. But the people by that point in time, the victims of the siege, had become sexless. And there was nothing like... All scenes were lovely, to a great extent even chaste. However, this matter managed to reach Suslov, who was, at that time, the ideology secretary of the Central Party Committee. Now, considering that these were 2 well-known writers, one could not just prohibit publishing flatly. Suslov, we were told, because we didn't actually speak with him, actually decided that these scenes were pornographic. This was also deleted. Well, thanks to Diana Tveklian, we managed to preserve a part, but some part had to be deleted or adjusted for the book to be published. And so the book was published in Moscow. At the beginning, just the first part, then the second part, and afterwards the both parts together. Straight away, there began a very unpleasant campaign on the part of the para-governmental historians, saying that it was a distortion of history, that the siege was not human suffering, but human heroism. The siege was something that one should take pride in. As for us, we still thought that the siege was both suffering and heroism, and crimes. Crime. And we attached documents to support this. About echelons coming with food to Leningrad before the war. I mean, not to Leningrad, but they were going to Germany. Just before the war, echelons with food. And when the war started, Mikoyan, who was in charge of the food supplies, decided to redirect these echelons to Leningrad because there were enough warehouses in Leningrad and so forth. And what came out of this? It just so happened that Zhdanov, first secretary of Leningrad Regional Committee, secretary of the Central Committee, member of the political bureau, and so on and so forth, declared that he would not accept these echelons as the city allegedly lacked free warehouse space. And he even approached Stalin, telling him that these echelons with food had been sent to them without permission. As we figured out later, although we did not have enough documents, but from spoken evidence, this was the outcome of bad relations between Zhdanov and Mikoyan. This was the motivation of the executives.
The advancing forces, the forces which invaded our country and intruded into our lives, were bringing the idea of the genocide, according to Hitler's words. The destruction and crushing defeat both of the army and the people, but also those who were in charge, those who led the resistance, starting from Stalin and some, if I may say so, military leaders of this constellation had absolutely no regard for human losses or human life.
This note of accusation, the bitter tone of these criminal circumstances, I cannot say otherwise. It played its sinister role. All this was present in the book. And this was annoying as well. So historians criticized the book on the one hand, and the victims of the siege, not all of them certainly, on the other hand, criticized us for hushing up incidents of cannibalism, incidents of pillaging, and said that we were downplaying everything. Everything was much more tragic and much harder. To some extent, they were right, the victims of the siege. Because at some limits, we would stop. We got to learn such sinister stories, such horror, such nightmares, which we thought were impossible to leave in the book. It was us who were the censors in this case. It was not due to some political reasons. No, it was because literature could not stand it. It just did not endure it. This was so unnatural. This was suffering so inhuman. Starvation drove people to utter brutality, and sometimes even worse. But Leningrad kept silent, and this book was first published in Leningrad in 1991. But even despite its publication in Leningrad, no reviews have appeared in the Leningrad press. Not one until now. This book has been as if left unnoticed.